Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to install an air locker in the rear end of my 2003 Suzuki Vitara. And if you did some research, you might be like, but they don't make an air locker for a 2003. Well, really a 99 or newer Suzuki Vitara or Chevy Tracker. And you would be correct. And that's because we are going to install what is an RD209 air locker made for the, I think it was 88 to 98 Tracker and Sidekicks. But there were some modifications needed. So I want to tell you guys about it so you can figure it out for yourselves and do it on your own project. So what happened? Quick recap. I broke a rear axle shaft.
Yep.
I got a new rear axle shaft. I got the broken piece out of my old differential carrier and I put it all back together with the new used axle shaft, and I found out that the carrier itself was actually had some run out. It was warped. So that sucks, but I had welded this differential up and I was using that as a poor man's rear locker. I didn't really want to do a mini spool. I'm like, well, if I'm going to do a mini spool, I might as well just weld it. I mean, in hindsight, I could have done a mini spool, but I broke the shaft, so it was going to break anyways. Unfortunately, took this out. I found some rear axles online that I could have bought. Most of them were out of state. I didn't want to drive out of state to get one, and or they were really expensive. I considered buying a whole other vehicle, which I could, but then, you know, like they're 20 years old and there's sketchy title situations and I don't want another vehicle sitting around here and I just want to fix my truck. So I did some research and they make air lockers for these things, but like I said, only for a 88 to 98, and then obviously they also have them for like the Samurais. But 88 to 98 had an RD209 air locker. Well, there's some slight differences between the two, and I've gone in and figured out what those were, and let's talk about it. So there are two differences with differential carriers between the 88 to 98 and the 98 until they ended them in like 2003, 2004. One is the where the ring gear mounts to the flange here, and I'll zoom in real quick. So if we get in here and look at these, this is the first main difference, and that comes out to the difference is around 170 thousandths, and it's too big of a difference to be made up with just the side gear adjusters, which are the adjuster wheels that fit in here. It's too much of a difference to make it up with those. So you have to make up that difference. So the only way to do that is to either machine away some of this carrier or machine away some of your ring gear. And fortunately on these, the ring gear is thick enough that it can handle it. So I just got this back from the machine shop, and they machined the thickness of this ring gear 170 thousandths. So I forgot to take any before pictures, but you can see here, this is a freshly ground surface. And special shout out to the General Mill Machine Shop in Kansas City. I called like 6 machine shops around Kansas City, and nobody was even interested in even looking at this project. And a couple of the people that were interested, they're like, oh, we're like 6 weeks out, whatever. But I called this General Mill Machine Shop, and they're like, oh yeah, bring it by, we'll take a look at it. And they're not paying me anything. They were the only ones that helped me on this. which deserves a plug on their part. And there, I was looking at their business card, and their slogan is, "The difficult we can do, the impossible takes a little bit longer." So anyways, they did it. They machined 170 thousandths off the thickness of my ring gear. He did tell me it was a pretty hard material, so it took him a little while to get through. What's the second difference between the two? On these differentials, the older carrier is bigger around than the newer carrier. So we also have to make that up. So you have two options. You can either machine down this differential, this air locker, or you can open up the center of the ring gear. And we chose to open up the center of the ring gear. There used to be a lip in here, and now there is no longer a lip. You can see where they machined it out there. So I'm gonna put my tools on this and measure these two real quick. So we know that we took the thickness of the ring gear down 170 thousandths, but I forgot to get a measurement. Actually, I told him to just make this fit on here. So when I got it back, they already had this on the differential. So we know it fits. So let's measure this quick, so I can actually tell you how big it is. I'm getting 4.64 inches, and then they put just a tiny little bevel on the inside there so it can go on a little bit easier. There's a little bit of a rounded spot on the lip right there. So they put a little bevel on there for me. They got it all fit up, and it worked good. So tonight we're going to put the ring gear on the carrier. I'm gonna take the bearings off the old carrier. I probably should have bought new ones, but stuff for this truck is getting hard to find. And I don't wanna pay $200 for a master rebuild kit. So I'm gonna try to reuse these bearings. And then we're gonna put these bearings on this, put this ring gear on here, and then we're gonna try to get this thing reassembled. So hopefully those measurements help you. I'll put them written out down below. And let's do it. I'm ready to drive this truck again. All right, so I got the ring gear put back on the differential. It was super tight. I said 4.640. You might want to put 4.641 or 2. Just make it a little bit more easier to get on, but still pretty close. Up to you. So I got this lined up. I got the bolts lined up, and then as you just saw, I just cleaned all of my ring gear bolts. If you're reusing these, and I know in some cases they probably shouldn't be reused, but again, this is a 20-year-old truck. Make sure you clean the threads if you've previously Loctited them, or if there's junk in the threads. Just clean them up with a wire brush, or sometimes I use these like dental pick things to get the old Loctite out of the threads. And you want to do that before you torque them in, because if you have a bunch of junk in the threads or dirt, it can mess with your torque measurements. Speaking of torque measurements, I can't actually find the specific torque specs for this differential. I found some kind of generic ones online that says about 70 foot-pounds, so I'm gonna put them to 65 or 70 foot-pounds and hope I don't snap any of them off. So sometimes you gotta make do with the best guess. One more thing about the Loctite. So there's, generally speaking, two different kinds of Loctite. There's usually red Loctite, which is permanent, and blue Loctite, which is serviceable. In this case, on the ring gears, you want the red permanent. This one's Vibratite brand, high strength red. It says 135. I've got a really old tube of red thread locker. Honestly, I can't even read it, but I'm gonna use up the end of this and then I'm gonna switch to this. This one's actually really cool because it's gel and it doesn't run off the end of your bolt. So I kind of like this better. So I just got all the ring gear bolts Loctited and snugged down. I used this, but I only like a couple clicks. And always, especially on anything that rotates, whenever you tighten down the bolts, you always want to alternate side to side. Same thing with lug nuts on a wheel. That's the best way to warp a rotor, is to go in a circular pattern and when you're torquing. So I always go back and forth across. So I just gave them like one click with this, just barely snugged. And then I'm gonna go back. I think I'm gonna start at 65 foot-pounds and then we'll see how I feel about it, or if I break any. So I got a 14 mil socket. I'm gonna set this to 65. I got a rag in here so it doesn't mar up the differential. Snug but not too tight. I didn't click it yet. I'm just gonna go around one more time, snug them up a little bit. Okay, and now I'll do the actual tighten. Alright, she's all torqued, and I'm super OCD, so I'm even gonna go around it one more time. Alright, so we've got the ring gear all torqued down, crisscross pattern. I did 65 foot-pounds and I went around all of the bolts twice. I marked them with a pencil so I could tell which ones I did, and then I made a little cross on them when I torqued them for the second time. Some people paint pin between the bolt and the housing. That way if you ever pull it apart, you can see if the bolt's spun on you or not. I'm not going to right now, but some people do, especially in critical applications. So what's next? What's next is pulling the bearings off of the old carrier. And I wanted to show this because it uses a cool tool. It was really expensive until recently. So, this is the Vivor brand bearing puller. I actually remember when these came out. It was back around 2005, and I was in college at the time for auto tech, and I remember when these things came out. And we had one at the college, and I was in, well, I still am into off-roading, but I was even more hardcore into off-roading. And I used to have to go up to the tech center to use it. And it was really cool, and they were like $800 at the time. They were only available from Yukon Gear. Now there is a plethora of, I'll call them knockoffs all over. And this one was sub $200. I think it was probably like 150 bucks or something. And I even bought the extra kit that comes with the super giant bearing that does like the Ford Super Duty axles and stuff. I'll probably never use that one, but if you're buying the kit, you might as well get it. So yeah, this kit is supposed to pull off these bearings without damaging them. Some of the other jaw pullers can damage the bearing races when it pulls them off. So hopefully by getting this, I'm able to pull off the bearing without damaging it. So you gotta find the right clamshell that fits behind the bearing without pulling on the cage. So you put the clamshells around it. And I totally forgot a step. It's been a while, a long while. This one has a 1.1/16" socket on it. So I'm going to run this down until it pushes on top of this shaft. This shaft pushes on the differential part, and then this clamshell pulls up on the bearing part. I don't know if I can lift this up to show you or not, but this is the order it goes in. That way, this part pulls up on the clamshell and the clamshell pulls off your bearing. It's kind of heavy. Put it on the retainer. Tighten it, and then send it. And then my battery died. Go me. There you go. I swear these are like the coolest tools ever. The bearing off. There you go. Got a perfectly unharmed side gear. Unless it was harmed in the process of the axle shaft breaking, which is possible. But whatever. We'll figure that out when we get there. And I'm gonna have to take these bolts out on this side because I can't get the clamshell in there. Did I mention I love this thing? I don't even get my air tools out anymore. I don't even know where they are. In a drawer somewhere. All right. So now we gotta do it one more time. So put this down. And then you put this down. loosen it again. Okay. Put your clamshells on. On the retainer. Fire away. That is awesome. It seriously doesn't get any easier than that. We should be done with this tool, because we'll use the press to press these on. All right, so I went and rummaged around in all of my junk piles. I got out my little press. I need a piece of steel to press on the inside, not on the race, but on the inside of this bearing to push it down over this. But it needs to be bigger than this, or else it'll get stuck on there. So it's not like I can use the other one to push it down, because then this one would get stuck too. I guess I could, well, yeah, so it would get stuck too. So I found this 2-inch piece of tubing that's just barely gonna fit over this, but not slip fit, and it will also push on this properly. So, but it's all chunked up on the end. So now I gotta cut, I'm gonna cut about a 2 or 3 inch piece out of it. That way I can fit it in my press. And that's what I will use to press the bearing on. So I got my piece of tubing cut. It's just ever slightly too small. So like a savage, I'm gonna cut long ways down it with a Sawzall and a really crappy blade. And I'm gonna hope that I can spread it out just a little bit. And I'll take out some of the burrs on the inside so it doesn't scratch it. But I'm gonna make it just barely slip over it. Redneck engineering at its finest. All right, that did it. So when I slit down long ways, it's spread open just enough that it just barely fits over the end of that. So I'll take the burrs out, and then we'll use it in the press, and it should work fine. Not bad for a free tool. All right, here we are at the next step. So we're ready to press on the bearings. I will use my press here. So we've got our differential, and then this is where we left off. This was a piece of 2-inch 11 gauge tubing, so 2-inch OD. And these guys got a V-notch in them. Grab a bearing, make sure it's pretty clean. Get it set on there. Spacer. Random piece of 1/4-inch plate out of the pile. You get everything as straight as you can get it. So when I put it down this side, I'm not gonna put it on the bearing. I'm gonna put it on the ring gear. So before I put this on, This is an air locker. And this snout side is longer than the factory side. And the reason for that see how much shorter that is? The reason for that is that there's a slipper ring that goes on the outside of this, so the bearing will fit up tight here, and then the slipper ring goes on the outside of this. And there's a tiny hole right there. I don't even know if you can see it. There's a tiny hole right there that lets air into the locker to lock it up. That's it. That's all there is to it. Well, I mean, obviously there's parts in there, but that's all that's actuating it. Dang it. It's too tall. Oh, that's nice. All right. There you go. Both bearings are on. You can see how the snout sticks out with the air hole. All right, so now I'm going to try to show you the reason that we machined the ring gear down and why I don't think you'll be able to get this project done without having it machined. One, it won't fit, the inner diameter won't fit over the differential without machining, but the thickness of the ring gear I think has to be machined too, and I'll show you why. So I have this set on 170 thousandths. That way you can see how far more over the differential would be if I was to have the thicker ring gear on there. Like, this adjuster wouldn't be able to go in far enough to set the backlash on this carrier. And it looks like on the other side we would be very close to the end of the adjustment threads on the other side. So it kind of makes you think, well, I could put a spacer there, which they make spacers for carrier bearings, but then you're still going to push yourself too far out of the threads here. So really, I think you probably really don't have an option other than machining the ring gear. And I don't think you can machine the carrier, because like this part right here, if you take 170 thousandths off that, I mean, well, I can't get my calipers in there, but you're gonna take off a lot of meat there. So you can't, there's not really enough meat there to take that much off of it. So unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, I had a really hard time finding a machine shop that wanted to do this, but if you want to do this project, I don't think you have another choice. So anyways, there's a close-up of what it looks like. So the next step is to figure out where to install this bulkhead fitting. So the whole point is you have to come from here up over the ring gear and over into this area that's away from the ring gear. So all I did was kind of pinch it. So my thumb and my index finger were kind of in the same spot on the inside and outside, kind of made sure like it's really thick right here. So I went to kind of where it's not going to be in the way of anything. So basically I'm going to drill the hole right there, tap it, and install this bulkhead fitting. And the air locker supply line will have to go up and over and out right here. First, I'm gonna dimple this with a center punch, and then I'm gonna start out with a small drill bit, and I'm gonna step up from there. And I got a rag stuffed in here, blocking the oil passage, so hopefully no chips fall down in my pinion bearing. And we're just gonna go to town. While I was in luck, my neighbor brought over a 1/4x18 MPT tap. So even though it's late at night, I'm just gonna be able to get this done, or at least closer. This requires a 7/16 drill bit. So as you guys just saw, I stepped up 3 times. So little drill bit, medium drill bit, 7/16 drill bits. So now I just need to tap this hole, and then I should be able to thread this guy in there. No, I shoved a rag in there, and I also put it so the pinion was up, and most of my shavings fell out onto the vise. And then with each stage, I pulled off the big pieces and put them in my metal scrap bucket, and then I vacuumed up all of the little pieces, trying really hard not to put excess metal shavings inside of my differential. Let's tap this and then put in our fitting. Because I wanted to make sure I didn't go too deep, because I didn't want it to be loose in there. So I got it so it's snug in there, hand tight, about 1 thread away from the housing. Once I put a little dope on there and then crank it all the way down, it should be just about flush with the housing. So I got the carrier back in. I cleaned out the threads really good with my air blow nozzle. You want to make sure you get these adjuster wheel threads really clean so you don't get incorrect readings or have it strip on you. That's just a bad situation. So I got it in here. I got these basically hand tightened. I got the diff so it's basically 0 backlash right now. So the instructions say to run this side in until it's touching, and then back it off a 1/4 turn, which is a good place to start. So this is the original adjuster wheel, and this is the adjuster wheel that came with the air locker, which also had some machining debris in the threads, so make sure you blow that out too. The reason the middle is missing is because it has to have enough room for the snout of the differential to have the air locker slipper ring on it. So I'm gonna put the new one in, and then we'll go from there. So once I get this tight, where'd my tool go? I'm gonna use my homemade tool. This is a piece of, I believe it's actually leftover porch deck rail with 2 bolts welded to it that are the appropriate size to make a spanner wrench. I ran this side in until it was tight against the pinion. I backed it off a 1/4 turn. I ran the other side in until it had pushed the bearing straight. Got it to where it was a little bit sloppy, so I ended up tightening this side, maybe back up about a 1/4 turn. Now that everything is aligned in there, you don't want to put too much preload on the bearings, but you want the diff to be tight so there's no play. Take this all with a grain of salt. I do this as a hobby. This is not my day job. Anyways, I wanted to show you how to check backlash on a differential. It's really not that hard. You need a dial indicator. I'm gonna try to put this at 0 and then show you, well, so all we're doing is measuring the jiggle, and the only spec I found online was 6 to 10 thousandths, and I'm at like 9-ish, and I'm gonna call that good enough. So I will torque these down and then proceed to the next steps. I want to show you one more thing that's been remediated since the last differential carrier I showed the video where it had run out. Check this out. Watch the needle as I go around. It's not moving at all. And I believe before it was moving by like 20 thousandths. That differential carrier was totally jacked. So this is the same ring and pinion, but on a new differential carrier. I'm gonna torque these caps 70 foot-pounds. I don't know if that's the right torque, but it's the only torque I can find online. All right, so I got all the bearing caps torqued. I rechecked the backlash again. It didn't change. I'm going to put in the locking tabs for these adjuster wheels. And since this one's only a half a wheel now, it didn't quite touch. So I'm gonna bend this up a little bit in hopes that it catches a little bit better, which it should. Yeah, so it can't move now. Since I have this apart, and some of these things are a mystery to those that don't know, I've personally never had an air locker before. I always did it the poor man style, just welded them up. But since I have it apart, I might as well show you how it works. There is a hole right here for air to go in to operate the mechanics of the locker. How do you get the air from up here into that hole on something that's spinning? Well, the way they do that is with this little guy here. There's a small hole right there in between two rubber gaskets. And that's it. So the air comes in through this coil that I will stick through the hole that I made. It fills this void between the two seals with pressurized air, and these two seals keep the air inside here, and all it does is apply pressure to the mechanism inside the air locker. So that's legit all it is. It's just basic plumbing. It's just a snout with a high pressure area right here that sends air through a bunch of little tiny channels, which is probably one of the reasons that I've avoided these until now, because I like to keep it simple, stupid, of it's welded, and if one wheel stops spinning, then that means something's broken, like an axle shaft. Whereas this, you know, if you get one of these seals cocked or wrong, or it wears out, you could experience issues in the future. So hopefully it's not an issue. I'm gonna put this on, I'm gonna stick it through, and then it says to test it. So we'll test it, make sure it works before I do final assembly. So I got the locker all put together, I got the air fitting put on, And now the directions say to test the fitting. Well, I was missing a couple of fittings to be able to do it the way that they wanted to do it. So I was like, well, I have to do this anyways. I might as well just set up my air tank. So let's talk about what air setup I'm gonna use, and try not to laugh. So I dug this out of my junk pile. It is a Husky Home Depot special, supposedly goes to 130 PSI. And I don't know, it's a tire inflator, and it plugs into a cigarette lighter outlet. And it's probably gonna put out plenty of air for the air locker, which requires very little air, but it needs to be at like 90 PSI. These normally have a tire inflator on them. Well, you can't hook that to an air tank. How do you do that? Well, you take a pair of scissors and cut off the end, and then you go find yourself a 1/4" barb fitting, shove it down in there and put a hose clamp on it, and now all of a sudden you have a 1/4" airline fitting, and you can screw a coupler onto it. Hooray! Problem one figured out. So now we have our air source. So the next step is, I didn't want to run the locker straight off of this because you need some reserve capacity. The really expensive, like $400 air compressors have like a little tank on the top of them, or you get the twin air compressor. It's got like a tank in between the two air compressors. I'll put a picture somewhere, which is cool and all, but I wanted to make my own tank, and I wanted to do it on the cheap. Looked around the internet, ended up on Amazon, of course. I found this. It's a Vixen air horns tank. I actually got lucky and found this one was a return item. Ordered it, it was perfectly fine. It must have just not fit for somebody. But I believe this is a 1/2 gallon tank. And I probably went way overkill engineering on this, but I like options. So I set it up in a particular way. So this is the outlet for my air compressor. Plugs in here. The next component on here is a T. So I have my air fitting. I use automotive style fittings. I've got a T with a union. This is the pressure sensor that came with the tank. And that's part of the reason I bought this tank, because it was a whole kit, and it's for air horns, but I mean, obviously I'm not using it for that, but the concept is the same. So I've got my air in. This is the pressure transducer switch that will turn on and off this air compressor once I wire it in. So the female fittings, when you unplug, they have a plunger in there that stops the air from going out. But when you have one of the male fittings and you unplug something, this would be, think like an air hose. Like you plug your air hose into your compressor, it's this fitting. Well, when you unplug this, your air hose goes and lets all that air out. And I didn't want to be, if I ever had to disconnect this, I don't want like, you know, blowing air everywhere, and I wanted to be able to isolate this. So I know this is a crappy compressor, but I think it's gonna be good enough. So what I'm doing is, let's say I got in a weird spot where I had to borrow some air from somebody. Well, I could have somebody pull up next to me, or I could pull up to somebody's shop and hook a shop air line onto this and fill my system from an outside source. So, I got my air hose here. Of course, it's wrapped around the side of my truck. And I came in here and hooked this on, and I can fill my air tank from any source, as long as it can connect onto it. And then I can just turn off this valve. So this has pressure in it right now, but it's not letting it out because I put a valve here. So this is my inlet. And then this is my outlet. So I did some research on air lockers, and they like between 100 and 150 PSI. no more than 150 PSI. It's been said that a lot of the seals blowing out inside of the differential have to do with people putting way too much air into them. So I bought a cheap little air tool, like if you were using a air ratchet or something. It's just a 1/4 inch airline regulator. So it's got a regulator and a gauge. And I set the locker at 100 PSI. I think, well, the book says anything over 90 is good, but I don't want to do too much either. So I have this regulator set at 100, so I know my locker will always get 100 PSI. $5, cheap insurance. So then I have the little fitting that came with the air locker and the line that came with the air locker. So the other thing I've got is a tank gauge. So just in case there's more pressure in the tank than there is coming through the regulator, I can see what it is. And then I also have a universal style air chuck here. That way, I don't know, you can plug an air hose into it and fill your tires or run an air nailer or whatever you wanted to do with that. I thought this was kind of cool. It's probably overkill engineering, but it's gonna be sweet when it's done. So right now, I've got this hooked up straight to the diff, and I aired it all up, and I'm reading exactly 100 PSI. I fixed one leak. I haven't heard any other leaks. So I'm gonna let this sit overnight and see how much pressure is left in the morning. I might do a soapy water bubble test if I feel like it. But for now, this is the setup of my air system. And I'll get this installed in the back, this hooked up to it, and then I'll eventually have to run permanent lines and a solenoid. So more to come on that.